and welcome everybody to another wonderful episode of Veterinary Tales, where we dive into hearing the stories of the victims from veterinary malpractice who we have these bad actors, right? And they would rather put their money, profession, whatever motivates them for this greedy thing in front of the care of their patients, which is what we're all about, is providing care to our loved ones. And tonight we have a wonderful guest with us. But first off, let me introduce the wonderful founder of Joey's Legacy, Mr. Scott Fine. Scott, how are you doing this evening?
Good evening, Colleen. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you for asking. And before we begin, I just would like to say that the expressions and views that are said during this podcast are from each individual. They may or may not reflect the views of Joey's Legacy, so just please keep that in mind, and everyone be respectful. We love comments, so as long as everyone's being respectful and kind, please feel free to leave those as well. And without further ado, I would love to introduce our guest. Her name is Alicia Brindisi, and she will be telling us about Luke's story. Hi, Alicia, welcome.
Hi, Colleen. Thank you so much. Thank you, Scott. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. We're very happy you're here. Unfortunately, the subject isn't a happy one, but we appreciate the fact that you agreed to come on and tell us about Luke. So why don't you just start from the beginning and let us hear what happened?
Absolutely. So Luke was a Cane Corso. If you're not familiar with the breed, that is an Italian Mastiff. So they're a large breed dog, very loyal to their people. I love the breed. I've had several of them throughout my life, and Luke was, no exception. He was a wonderful dog, beautiful dog. I adopted him in 2015. He was on the euthanasia list at a kill shelter in New York City. From what I was told, his owner had passed away, and he was dropped off there by a family member and was never picked up again. So I had just lost a dog, and I really wasn't ready for another one, but someone had shown me a picture of him, and it was one of those, wow, there's a connection there type of a thing. And I remember the next day I was like, should I, shouldn't I? So over a period of a couple of weeks, I had a great network of people that advocated for Luke to get him safe and to make sure he was not going to be euthanized. And I ended up getting him on July 2nd of 2015. It was our Independence Day celebration, so it was very memorable. And he was a beautiful dog. I wanted to just share a photo of him. I don't know if you can even see it, but
yes,
kind of a big lug, kind of a big guy. And he was
sweet face.
You get them out of the rescue and the shelter, and you don't always know what you're going to get. But he was a wonderful dog. He did come with some baggage. He was pretty afraid of people, but he loved animals. So I worked really hard with Luke for a lot of years. I had a behaviorist. I had dog trainers. We went to classes. I mean, I really invested in Luke because knowing his breed and knowing that he had some issues, I really wanted him to have a good life and not just be sort of, like I couldn't take him places. I traveled a lot, and I loved to travel with my dog. So I wanted Luke to go too, so it was really important. And all of this, because he was so different than the other dogs who really didn't have as much baggage, I think that's what bonded us a lot, because we really had to know each other. I could read him. I had to follow him. I had to watch him. I had to make sure he felt safe in situations and to protect him, to protect other people. He wasn't aggressive, but he was afraid of people. So he would get uncomfortable quickly, and, he was comfortable with the people he knew and the places we went regularly, but strangers and certainly the veterinarians were not his favorite, right? That was kind of a scary place for him. We would go into the vet's office, and he loved the staff. He loved the girls that would meet him, and they'd sit on the floor with him and give him cookies. And so he loved being there. He was okay with that, but he wasn't okay with someone handling him, touching him, examining him, somebody that wasn't me. And even times, he wasn't so sure about me. So he always required a lot of sedation, and I was never comfortable with that. It never felt like the right thing to do for him. But, you know, throughout the time that we had together, I would try to mitigate those types of, you know, that type of exposure to him as much as possible by making sure procedures could be done sort of, you know, at once, or exams could be done very thoroughly. So we wouldn't be having to make a lot of vet visits, so he could, you know, so he didn't have to be sedated a lot. So that was sort of a challenge for us. And I think as Luke got older, he got a little bit more difficult in the vet setting and the office setting. And I think I mean, this is my personal feeling, and I, you know, this is just what I felt, that he was a lot to handle. So a lot of times I would call and say, I think Luke's got something going on and I'd like to be seen. And I got a little bit like, well, why don't you just watch it for a day or two and then let us know? Because I think they didn't really want to deal with having to sedate him. And a couple times the sedation didn't always work. He would, you know, he would wake, he would get scared and there would be a reaction. And so a lot of times I started to, you know, as he got older, I started to feel like people, you know, the office is being really put off by us being there. And that's sort of the incident that happened with Luke that led to his death, you know, that happened. So this happened in 2019. It was October. And Luke was a healthy dog. I really didn't have any issues with him. He had a couple of little things. He had like a small tumor in his mouth that he had surgery for. He wasn't fixed. He was an intact male, but that was something that I decided to do with behaviorist, and it was a decision that I made, and I got a lot of flack for that from my regular vet, and feel like it was a good decision because maybe that's what Luke's aggressive, you know, tendencies and when he was afraid would result in. But that was a personal decision that I made with someone I trusted, and I said that was the best decision. So again, it was like a lot of times I was being maybe a little, people were doubting my decisions around him, but I really do think I had success in with everything that I did for him, whether it was, you know, the people we saw, the places we went, the classes we took. It was all to make him feel better, safer, enrich life. So yeah, I feel like I did the right thing always for him. In about mid-October, maybe around the 20th of October, I was in upstate New York, and I was visiting with my boyfriend at the time, he's still my boyfriend, and noticed Luke's was starting to swell. Now, Luke had jowls and, you know, sort of a big face dog, a lot of skin, and he just sort of had a little puffiness to one cheek. So he didn't seem bothered. He wasn't hurting. He didn't seem uncomfortable. He was eating fine, playing with his toys, chewing his bones. Didn't really see anything wrong with it. After a couple of days, it started to grow very rapidly, and his cheeks started to swell. So I ended up going home to Connecticut around the 23rd of October, and I called our regular vet, and I said, look, Luke's got some facial swelling. I think he should be seen. And the response I got was, why don't you watch it for a couple of days, because we'll have to sedate him when you bring him in and examine his mouth. So just keep an eye on it. And I said, okay, I'll just keep an eye on it. So that was around the 23rd. I went back up to New York for a few more days. And on the 27th of October, Luke's face was like tripled in size, maybe even bigger. It was really blown up. It was his cheek, his eye, his neck. He was just super puffy. I called the vet and I said, look, we're coming home. You know, I'd like him to be seen or something. And so I got home on the 29th and called my vet, and they said, well, come in and get some antibiotics. It could be an infection. But now by this point, Luke's face was so bad. Like, we should have gotten the antibiotics with the first phone call and not like after the point where his face was just huge, right? So I went and picked up the antibiotics. It was in the morning on the 29th of October. I was able to give Luke one dose that morning. And later in the day, in the evening for dinner, he was supposed to get a second dose. And by the time dinner came around, he could not swallow He did not want to eat. He didn't want to take pills. I couldn't get him to take the medication at that point. So I brought Luke to the local emergency room. Now, this is a group that is affiliated with my veterinary practice that I was doing at the time. It's sort of like their main hospital, very well known this was in the state of Connecticut, very well known, very reputable. I used them for 20 years. It was like the place to go, right? They had all the high tech equipment and great staff. And in all fairness, they did have good staff members, and I did have positive experiences there. But I noticed that the hospital began to grow, and even my local vet, which was in a very small town, which I had been using for almost 20 years that I'd been living in the town, I started to notice a shift. It was very obvious that things not what they used to, was much more of like a hometown feel and one-on-one with your vet. And I had a dog that had broken a leg, and the doctor even like picked him up, put him in his car, and drove him to the emergency room for me because I didn't have the ability to do that. And so I always felt like very welcome there. And so this was really hard for me to feel like I was being, maybe Luke was being maybe looked over a little bit because of the way that he was. So the evening of the 29th, when he wouldn't take the rest of the medication, I took him to that emergency room. We finally got in to see the vet, the ER vet, at about 11:30ish, and he understood that Luke needed some special handling. Couldn't put a muzzle on him because of the facial swelling, and in order to sedate him, we had to put a muzzle on him. So it was a bit of a challenge. I wanted to add, before I go any further, that before any of this happened, I'd been working with a fear-free vet to try and make veterinary practice and visits better for Luke so that we didn't have to muzzle him or sedate him. And we had done such a good job that we were getting to the point where we probably give him an injection without any type of muzzle. There's a lot of sessions and patience and creativity and things like that. So with a little bit of patience, I think Luke could have been handled very easily. But it was late at night, and the vet that was on call, the ER doctor that night, very honestly said, "I'm sorry, but we just don't have a lot of resources to throw at a dog like Luke tonight. So why don't you take him home, and we will, call your regular vet in the morning and come up with another plan." And I was really frustrated because I said, I did call, I did get on the phone today. He got these antibiotics. He won't take them. I can't do anything about that. He needs some kind of medical attention now, because I don't know what this is going to look like, in the morning, kind of a thing. So we left, and I was really upset, obviously. It was getting difficult for him to swallow. I was worried about his breathing. As a Mastiff, he is a if I pronounce it correctly, a brachycephalic. He's got a short snout, so his breathing was already compromised by the way he's structured, and here he has this airway obstruction with swelling and his face and everything like that. So it was really concerning. I had a friend that worked in this hospital, and I reached out to her. And it's a really difficult part of the story for me because of what happened in this hospital. I lost a friend. But she helped me, and she managed to find a doctor in the hospital that was willing to see Luke that day. When we got home, it was in the morning. So now this is October 30th. And she said, go back to the hospital. There's a doctor in the ER right now, and he will see you. So I felt better. I felt hopeful that he was going to be seen and get the right treatment that he needed. So I drove back to the hospital with Luke. And now at this point, believe it or not, his face was even bigger. I mean, I couldn't imagine that his face was growing anymore, but it was just huge. It was really bad. We got in to DR, and we got seen right away. And I spent a lot of time with this doctor, and I felt very comfortable with him. I felt like I could trust him. And I talked to him at length about my concerns about oversedation with Luke. They still didn't diagnose him. We still didn't know if he had an abscess, a broken tooth, like what was going on here? Did he have some kind of infection? What could this have been? Was it a tumor? Like nobody was telling me what this was yet, but they needed to do some diagnostic tests and see what was going on inside his face there. So I said, that's fine. I understand, we've got to run some tests, whether it was an X-ray or CAT scan or MRI. We were talking about the different options. So I said, I know you've got to sedate Luke, but I don't, if he has to be admitted, if he needs surgery, I don't want him to just be drugged and doped up and completely out of it for the entire stay, because he had a really hard time with sedation. Like coming out of the sedation was always tough for him, and it kind of lingered, and it really took a few days to recover. And the doctor assured me, he said, no, you know what? We'll keep him comfortable and we'll back off on the sedation if he's resting quietly, if he's sleeping. We don't need to keep it flowing. We can sort of give him a little air, get him a little bit more back to himself, as long as he's comfortable. And I felt great. I really felt like he was in good hands. This is the hardest part. I had to say goodbye to Luke. I had to leave him, and he was a mama's boy. So saying goodbye to him was really tough, because I had to trust him. I had to trust that this guy was going to take good care, was going to get him returned to me. And I think I even said something like, just as long as I get to take him home, I'm good. Like, I understand this has to be done. He needs help.
Right.
So we devised a plan where I would sort of spend some quiet time with Luke, and then the doctor would come in and we would sort of casually hand Luke off, with a leash, and he would sort of distract him, and I would sneak out, and I just, pat him on the head, gave him a kiss, and just said, hey buddy, I'll hopefully see you later or tomorrow, and that was it. And I didn't know that would be the last time that I would see him. Sorry, I was trying really hard not to get up. So Luke was admitted, and he had a CT scan later that day on October 30th, and he was diagnosed with the abscess, and they scheduled him for surgery the next day, which was Halloween, October 31st, 2019. A couple things I found out later, and this becomes important, is that during the CT scan, Luke was given several sedatives. He was given ketamine, dexdomitor, butorphanol, and propofol. He was given those 4 sedatives during that test. He was on a ventilator. He stopped breathing during the procedure, and he was resuscitated. Now, I did not find that out until after Luke died, and that angered me, because had I known that he had stopped breathing in that procedure, I might have been able to have a discussion about a better sedation protocol for him. And because it's possible he had a reaction to one of those drugs, or maybe something else was going on. And so in hindsight, I was really angry that I didn't know that had happened. I actually read about it in the documents that I had received from the hospital, and I'd never been told until I called it out as something of an issue. So the 31st was the day of his surgery. They did surgery. They opened up the abscess. They drained it, flushed it out, administered medication, and put a drain in, and got him all set up, and they put him into his kennel. And what they would do for Luke is they would sort of run a really long IV line over the kennel door, so that from the outside of the kennel, they would administer sedation so that they wouldn't have to handle him. And then when he was sedate enough to handle, they would take him out and do whatever procedures that they needed to do. So that was the 31st. I got a call that he was resting comfortably. He was awake. He was alert. Things were going well. And I could probably take him home the next day, which was November 1st. November 1st, early in the morning, my friend who worked at the hospital sent me a photograph of Luke. He was alive and well. It was about 7:30 in the morning. And he was curled up in his kennel area, and he had a big collar on and a blanket, and he was asleep and he was alive. And I had some personal things going on at the time. I had lost my power at my house. My cell phone was broken. I wasn't at home. I had to go work at my parents' house. So I was further away from the hospital. I was about almost 40 minutes away from the hospital, whereas at my house, I would have been about 20 minutes. So it was just a lot of stress, right? So it was just, wow, this is not what I needed today. Luke's in the hospital. I was really anxious about it. Something I regret is I made the decision not to go see him that morning, because he did get anxious when he saw me, because he was, nervous, and he was very attached to me. And he had stayed in the hospital one other time, and it was really tough to calm him down once he saw me. He would get really worked up. And I said, I saw him, he's okay, he's resting. I'm picking him up later today, right? That's what they were telling me. Like, he's coming home at the end of today. So I got a call about 11:30 in the morning that he was doing okay. They told me that his drain was more active than they had wanted it to be. So it was really filling. The drain was really filling a lot. And they thought that it was better for him to stay one more day. I found out later that morning, when they had checked the drain, they had left the clamp on the drain closed. So it wasn't that the drain was very active, it's that the drain was closed. And it was not being allowed to drain and do its job. So when they rechecked it later in the day at about 3 o'clock, they saw that it was, it was filling. They just thought it wasn't drain, it was just a lot of drain, but it was really that it wasn't draining at all, because the clamp was closed. So this becomes important too, as to what happened to Luke in the end. Somehow I was told that he lost his catheter line, which is what they were using to administer sedation. And so they needed to fix the clamp, but now he wasn't getting sedation. And so they needed to take him out of the kennel and manually handle him and sedate him. When they took him out, according to what the hospital said, he became aggressive. And in order to administer sedation, they took an IV pole with a needle attached to it and kind of jabbed him with it, from a distance. And they once again administered him multiple drugs. And I really don't know if he got too much or too little. At that time, I found out later what he got, but he was given afaxolone, ketamine, dexamethasone, and propofol again. Now, during the MRI or the CT scan, when he had the apnea and he stopped breathing, they did administer a reversal, the antecedent, which is the reversal drug. So you would think that if he had those drugs and he stopped breathing, you would administer that again, if that situation happened again. So he comes out of the kennel, he's acting up. They take this needle from a distance, they just start jabbing him with it, administer all these drugs to him in various doses, and he becomes extremely sedate. He's completely out, cold. They fix him up, fix the clamp. They said he had some blood on him. They cleaned him up. They put him back in the kennel. Now, from what I understand, he was put into a different location in the hospital, not the main part of the hospital, but put away from the activity in a quieter area to recover. He was not provided with any airway support, no ventilation, no breathing monitoring. He was given nothing. It was just a visual, okay, I'm looking in on him type of a thing. At 4:35 p.m. on Friday, November 1st, 2019, I got a phone call from the surgeon, and I said, hello, how are you? Is everything okay with Luke? Can I come pick him up? And she said, things are not going well. In fact, we found Luke expired in his kennel, and we're giving CPR, but I think we're going to stop because it's not working. I thought I was hearing things like, you got to be kidding. I said, I'm sorry, what? He's expired. Like, I couldn't wrap my head around what that word meant in this situation. And she said, yeah, he stopped breathing and he's not breathing, and we need to stop CPR because it's not working. I mean, she was really abrupt with me on the phone. I dropped the phone. I screamed. I don't know how I drove 40 minutes to the emergency hospital by myself, but I did. I didn't thankfully hurt anybody in the process. And unbeknownst to me, when I left, my mom picked up the phone, and the surgeon actually said, Luke's been dead for quite some time. And she claims that she asked my mother if they should stop CPR. And my mom said, first of all, I would never tell anybody to stop CPR on your dog. And she said, no, I never said that. And the surgeon said, well, I thought I told your mom. I thought your mom said stop, but, there was a lot of like, I'm not sure really what I said, and I'm not really sure what happened. This phone call took place at 4:35. I've got the stamp on the phone. Later, when I received the CPR log, the time that CPR was started was marked 4:36. So that would be after the time that I got the phone call. The hospital tried to tell me that it was like splitting hairs, well, maybe the clock was slow. But according to the CPR log, CPR was ongoing, and I asked them how long they would have done CPR, and she said 5 to 10 minutes. So in that case, Luke would have still been alive, or they would have still been working on Luke, when they called me. And that's very in conflict what happened versus what was written. And so that came to light a few, after this happened.
Right.
So I showed up at the hospital, and I was ushered into, I came in screaming for him, where's my dog? Where's Luke? In a hospital full of people. I didn't care. And they took me to the same room where I had said goodbye to him when I dropped him off alive. And they left me there for almost 45 minutes all by myself. And I was just screaming for him and calling for him and calling for somebody to come and to tell me where he was and let me see him and tell me something good, like that he was okay. And nobody came. Nobody came for 45 minutes. And then eventually someone came in, and they were angry that I was yelling because I was being disruptive to the other people in the hospital.
Too bad.
Yeah, that's what I said. So they brought my dog in, Luke. Brought him in on a stretcher. He was on his side, and he was gone. He was absolutely gone. And my first words out of my mouth were, "You killed him." Now, I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what had happened, but I knew this was not him having a reaction, him having a cardiac arrest. Like, something was done to make this incident come to be what it was. Just came out of my mouth. And she lied him down on the ground and on the stretcher, and I just remember I lied on top of him, and I held him. And I thought it was unusual. I thought about this after. He was very warm. Now it had been almost 2 hours since the phone call, so he would have been cold, I think, much colder than he was. So I feel like maybe in my heart, I feel like Luke was probably gone a lot longer than I was told, and that the time that they took, this is just speculation, but the time that they took getting him to me was spent maybe trying to warm his body a little, because he did have a heating blanket in his crate. So I don't know. That's just sort of something that I think back on, that maybe he really was deceased a lot longer than the time that they told me. I feel like maybe he would have had a chance if somebody had really been paying close attention to him. Or if he'd had some type of monitoring, some different type of monitoring. So I was with him for hours. My family members came, and a couple of friends came in to support me. And while we were there, sort of huddled around Luke, kind of memorializing him a little bit, talking about him. And he was such a beautiful dog. I mean, pictures don't do Luke justice. He was stunning. And when people would see him in person, they would say, wow, what a beautiful dog. Like, he was just gorgeous. One of the most beautiful Cane Corsos that I've ever had and ever seen. He was just really special and really unique. And so here he was, you know, he almost just looked like he was sleeping. It was really hard, you know, but we were talking about how beautiful he was and how smart he was. He could do every trick in the book. Like, he was just really amazing. I was so proud of him, how he faced all his fears, you know, and was always by my side. He was really my partner. And at that point, someone from the hospital came in and said, we've got a bill and we've got some things we need to settle up. And how would you like to pay for this? Like, what? It was astonishing. And my mom was there and she said, get out. Like, we don't want to see a bill right now. We don't want to know what you have to say. Just get out. We don't want to talk about cremation. We don't want that. Just go. Just leave us. When we're ready to come out, we'll come out. And it was really rough. I mean, that is not what you need to have happen at that moment. So everyone left, and I spent more time alone with Luke, and it was late in the evening when I finally left the hospital. And I was just numb, just completely numb. I just didn't know where to go, right? So I went to my mom and dad's house. I went back to their house, and I stayed pretty comatose for the entire weekend. I was in great disbelief that my Luke was gone. I just couldn't understand how a perfectly healthy dog who didn't even have anything really serious going on had a successful surgery, was recovering from that surgery, and died in the aftercare. Like, it just didn't click. How could that happen? I was really in rough shape all weekend, but I called the hospital Monday morning and said, I immediately need to have all of Luke's records, everything. I want them as soon as possible, and I want to speak to the director of the hospital. So I ended up getting a call from him the next day. I think it was a Tuesday, and I had written down a lot of questions that I had for him. And one of the first things he said was, well, Luke may have had some underlying conditions. I said, really? Did you read his records? They came from your hospital, you know? He said, yeah, I read them. And I said, well, what do you think? He's like, maybe not, you know, maybe he didn't really have a heart condition, but he was sort of like trying to like make it something it wasn't. But then when I kind of questioned it, he was like, yeah, well, I didn't see really anything in the records, but I can look again. And I was like, no, there's nothing there. The dog was never diagnosed with as much as a heart murmur. He had nothing. He was a healthy dog. And so I just said, look, I'd like to come in and talk to you. I'd like to talk to the doctor that took care of Luke, and I'd like to ask some more questions and see if I can get some more answers. So in the meantime, I had reached out to some people I know that work in the veterinary field, and just said, would you mind when I get these records, just taking a look, just kind of give me something to understand, I had questions about things, and I got some records. I ended up getting emailed some records, and it was call notes, and I brought them to my friend, and that friend said, no, this was not the person that worked in the hospital. It was somebody who never had seen Luke before, had never treated him, just happened to be in the same field. And I was like, sure, I'll read those documents and give you, help you with some terminology. I just want to understand some of the language. And the first thing they said was, where's the rest of the records? It wasn't all there. I was missing the sedation log, the CPR log, really a lot of the nitty gritty of what was going on in the hospital. And what I received was just a summary of like high level summary of today, we did this today. Luke had a CT scan, Luke had surgery, it wasn't really the details. It was more like a summary. And the summary of the day that he died wasn't transcribed until the next day. So it wasn't even captured sort of in that moment. It was captured the next day, which I thought was odd. So the record keeping was not good. But after literally having to almost like be banging on their door, I finally got the records. But it wasn't until over a week later when I finally got access to all of his records. And that's when I started to read. And I work in the medical field. I'm not a veterinarian, but I understand certain things. And so as I was reading through, I was like, well, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. What's this? Like, this seems not to match. I was really questioning it. So I made some notes and I did some research and just tried my best to make sense of the whole thing. And I went about 2 weeks after Luke died, I went to the hospital and I met with the medical director and the surgeon, and I talked to them for close to 2 hours, I think, and asked a lot of questions. And what I found was that, as I mentioned earlier, Luke had an incident where he had stopped breathing initially. I was never informed of that. This is where I learned about the clamp being closed, the drain being closed. There was a lot of discrepancies around how the IV catheter had come out. Someone said that he tripped over it. Someone else said that he chewed it out. And I said, well, he's wearing a cone. He couldn't reach his paws to do anything. Plus, he was so sedated that there's no way he was chewing anything.
Yeah.
Right? There's a lot of just things that made no sense to me, and I just really was not comfortable. The thing that really disturbed me was that when I questioned how that sedation was given to him on the day that he died, how it was administered sort of, by jabbing him with this needle. And I said, he'd stopped breathing in the scan that you'd done. Why did you administer the reversal drug, the antecedent? And they said, no, they never administered the antecedent. And so I questioned that, and they said, well, sometimes they said they wanted Luke to recover more slowly from the sedation. But the thing was, I believe in the packaging of this product, you are to give the reversal drug. Like, it's not something like that's going to wear off. You have to reverse it. You have to give that antecedent in order to reverse it. And when I asked her if she would do anything different, she said no. She felt like she had made all the right decisions. And I couldn't understand that because Luke had died. So clearly that was not a right decision to not give him that reversal drug. And also not a right decision to not really monitoring him. So if his drain is not operating properly and he's got airway constriction and you've now heavily sedated him and you put him in a kennel with a bunch of blankets and you just walk on by, she said, well, I heard him breathing. I don't know how you heard him breathing, or it just doesn't make sense. I just felt like that was a real bogus thing to say, that she had witnessed him breathing. I just couldn't buy it. I'm sorry. I just couldn't buy it. It just felt like there's a lot more to this. She also tried to make a case that there was something else going on. She had said, well, with everything that was going on with Luke, something like this was bound to happen. So I said, well, what was going on? And she said, well, he had hip dysplasia. I said, well, that didn't affect him. That didn't kill him. You don't have to, in this situation, his hips had nothing to do with him dying. She also said that, she admitted that he was not given any ventilation, whereas in the CT scan, he was on a ventilator. So he was breathing room air, and it was less likely that he would recover from an incident like this where he stopped breathing just without some type of airway support. So I also asked if they had done an ECG, because it was my understanding that ECG is part of the CPR protocol, so that if there is some heart activity, that can be detected. And the director of the hospital assured me that there was an ECG. However, they did not see the results of that ECG or any of the recordings from that in the record, but they were going to look to see if that existed someplace else. A few days after this meeting, I received a phone call that those ECG notes or records or recordings, whatever it was, were nowhere to be found, which made me feel like maybe that hadn't been done. But I was also told that there was a video of this whole scene unfolding in the emergency room at this time, and that the video showed that the ECG had been done. So I asked to see the video, and I was told that was not possible.
Of course.
But to me, that feels like usually a video is there to protect people. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, we've got a video to show you this is absolutely done. We followed our protocols. So by not showing it to me, I think the story was, well, this is a privacy issue, right? Because there's a lot of people in that video. And I said, well, you don't have to show me the other people. There's ways you can take still frames, you can block things out. It could be done, right? So I never got to see the video either. So they were really not nice. they were kind of, I think they were protecting themselves. They were, I remember the day I went in to meet with them, the doctor said to me, well, a lot of people lose their pets. And I said, yeah, but a lot of them aren't sitting across the table right now having this conversation like we are because something went horribly wrong. This wasn't like he died of natural causes or he was ill, he didn't have cancer. He walked in a healthy dog who had an abscess. He was not an infirm dog. He was not suffering. He didn't have any other, issues that were going on that could predispose him to a death like this. It just was impossible. It just wasn't happening. I received some advice from a friend that maybe I should look up the hospital on our local, like our statewide judicial website to see if there had been any other issues with the hospital. Now, again, this was a hospital I'd gone to for 20 years. I've seen a lot of doctors. I felt like I could trust them, and they treated Luke pretty badly. It was obvious from the things that I read that they were rough with him. I think they were rough with him because they felt he was hard to handle, so they could handle him a little bit more, with a heavier hand. That was my feeling from what I read, and sort of in my heart, I sort of got that sense that could have been the situation. So I ended up looking up the hospital on the Connecticut judicial website, and there were multiple lawsuits filed against the hospital for malpractice or inappropriate responses or inappropriate behaviors and things like that. Excuse me. I was reading through them. I think at that time there were 3 that were posted that were active, and it was heartbreaking. And I felt so angry because I had no idea. I never even thought to look there because why would I? This was somebody I used, I trusted, they were good people. And I know there's good people there. I just think that they were going in the wrong direction. They were very corporate. The hospital was expanding, a lot of money being filtered in, big expansions, specialty care. It was just not the same place. So I read through those lawsuits, and it was just devastating to see that other families were going through this. And that is the first time ever the words veterinary malpractice I had ever seen them before. I just didn't even know there could be such a thing. And I called the attorney that was handling one of the cases and spoke to her. And I worked with her for a period of time, and she left, and then I got another attorney. So I felt like I was okay. I had a good team of lawyers. They were experienced in this, and I referred them to Joey's Legacy, and they did some reading and were following along with some of the other things that were going on, just to make sure they had kind of covered their bases. So this past, just before the holidays, it had gone back and forth in the court system a few times. We'd filed our initial complaint. There was discussions about depositions and should this be a bench trial or a jury trial, back and forth. And, the insurance company, to them, it's not anything. It's an insurance claim. So you're dealing with the insurance company. You're not really dealing with the people. That was hard for me because I wanted to have my moment where I could tell my story, but that wasn't how it went. It wasn't like that. It was like, well, this is just insurance. We have an insurance company that takes care of this. I did get an expert witness, and she was amazing. And I was told it would take about 6 months to get some feedback from her, and we got it in 2 weeks. She knew immediately when she read the files and put all the pieces of the puzzle together that this was a clear-cut case of not following the standard of care, and that the lack of the failure to document things well, the failure to communicate things to me about what was going on preceding this event. Also, exercising reasonable care, making sure that a dog that has airway constriction is being carefully monitored, and that didn't happen. Also subjecting Luke to sort of excessive sedation after I'd expressed, and it's actually written in the call notes, the owner has expressed concern over the amount of sedation. We discussed sedation protocol. So it was very clear from the very beginning that this was a concern for me, that I knew Luke could be affected by over sedation or heavy sedation. And that if that was going to be the situation, then there needed to be some very careful monitoring, making sure that he was recovering, he was going to be okay. And that standard of care was not followed in this hospital whatsoever. Also, I think just post-operatively, his care was lacking, leaving the drain clamp closed, not securing the catheter, those types of careless errors. And it wasn't just on the day of the event, it was leading up, not wanting to see him the first phone call that I made, not prescribing the antibiotics sooner, not seeing him the first time he was in the emergency room, not bringing him back, not, having come back again. And I regret it. I wish I had taken him somewhere else, but I didn't know where to go. This was the premier place, and I had a friend there, and I don't fault her in any way, but I did lose her friendship because this was her employer, and she stood by her employer, and I have to respect that, right? That's her decision. But when I started to speak more publicly about it, she was hurt by that. But I said, you know what? Sometimes you have to not worry about everybody else's feelings and do what's right. And for me, doing what was right was telling Luke's story,
Right.
and letting people know that there's some not good things happening at this hospital. Since I filed my lawsuit, there were other lawsuits that followed mine because I kind of keep up with them on the judicial website. Several of them have settled, and some of them were small claims because of the amount of money. They went to small claims versus a civil court. We ended up settling in December. I have to tell you, it was a horrible experience. We worked with a mediator as opposed to going to court. They were trying to not get us to go to court. It was like right when the Omicron was spiking and the courts were shutting down again. And I think they were really trying to push it through and sort of settle it before the new year, before the holidays and things like that. So we went before the mediator with my attorneys and the insurance company. And, we were going in with I think a really respectable number that was to cover my costs. The costs for Luke were into the thousands, like thousands and thousands. I'm not supposed to mention the number, but let's just say it was more than what a small claims court would be, and I'm still making payments on it. Like, it was well into the thousands, high thousands, put it there. So we went in with a 5-number, request, five numbers for our the amount that we were asking. It's not about the money. It was never about the money for me. I really wanted them to be accountable. I really wanted to be able to say, look what they did. They did this. This happened because they didn't follow the standard of care, because they cut corners, because they weren't careful, because they just didn't care as much. Maybe there were a lot of dogs in the hospital that night, and he was just one of 20 other dogs. I don't know. But whatever they did, my dog died because of it. And I will go to my grave knowing that they killed him. I will never believe anything else, that he had something wrong with him, that it was an accident, that it was careless from the very moment to the very end. And even after the communication, getting records, the way that they talked to me in the face-to-face meeting. I mean, I think they were trying, but they were falling short. They were really failing. And it was devastating. So we ended up settling. We did not get the number we asked for, but they did cover the costs, which I was told was kind of a big deal. I don't know in other states how it works, but they did cover the costs. But after I paid the fees, attorney fees, the expert witness fees, and there wasn't a whole lot left for Luke. And I had really hoped to do something with that money to put it towards a better cause, to support another family potentially that was going through this same situation. Like, I really wanted to be able to build that up a little bit and use it for good, but there was just almost nothing left there. And so instead I can use my words, and I can talk to you about it and spread the word and tell people not to be afraid. And it's left me scarred too. I mean, I think I lost a friend, which is really difficult for me. I lost a group of people, a community that I trusted. And these people had taken care of my pets for 25 years. They weren't just somebody that I went to occasionally. Like, they helped my other dogs that had cancer or were really ill or whatever. And so I cared about them. And so it hurt me that they didn't care about me, or that's what it felt like. And they didn't care about Luke enough to take the time with him and understand him. Another vet was willing to do that, and that's how these hospitals get. They get so busy. And I know it's a tough business. I'm not saying that they're all bad, as we talk about in all of our discussions. There are bad ones and there are good ones. And I was so lucky to find some good ones. I do have 2 other dogs now. It was a really tough decision for me, but I am a dog lover and a dog mom, and I cannot imagine not having another dog to rescue. So I have a little rescue dog who's a bulldog, and I have another Cane Corso, and they were very healing for me. But at the same time, I was terrified to take them to the vet the very first time I had to. And I had to go to grief counseling. I had a support group of people, like a live support group for pet loss that I went to. I described the feelings I had after Luke died as drowning, just drowning in my own air.
That's what it is.
I couldn't breathe. I couldn't understand that he was gone and that I never got to say goodbye to him. Like, they stole that from me. And nobody knows what that feels like until you go through it. It's just, there's no words to describe it. But that was what I would say. Like, I'm drowning in my own air. And New Year's would come and I was devastated to leave the year behind, because that was the last of Luke, right? 2019. But I did get these dogs, and they have been wonderful and very healing. But my female dog, my Mastiff, she needed to have a spay surgery, and I couldn't do it. I canceled. I was hysterical. I eventually did go through with it with a wonderful doctor who said, nothing's going to happen to her on my watch. And I will call you even before she's awake. Like, I will tell you like how it went before she's in recovery room. Like, I will call you the minute we're done. And I sat in their parking lot because it was during COVID and I couldn't go in. And he did. He kept his word and he called and talked me through it. And, you know, we survived that. And then, you know, but I still wasn't comfortable with the whole bringing the dogs into the vet. And I actually have gone through a couple different vets because it was during COVID and I couldn't leave them. I couldn't pull into a parking lot and drop them off at the doorstep. It couldn't happen. And I was able to find a doctor that was willing to see us face to face during the pandemic. And we sort of stuck with him. And that's been healing for me, because having that face to face is really important. Being able to see people's expressions and look them in the eye and say, look, I'm really scared, to have to understand that we need to talk, is important. And I think that a lot of people who didn't get that opportunity and may have lost their pets during the COVID pandemic is, you know, it makes it that much harder when you don't get to have that moment to just say what you need to say face to face. So we're, you know, I'm healing slowly, but I have to be very honest. It's like PTSD, and I'm sure, Scott, you've experienced that too. I mean, just last night, I definitely had this day on my mind that this was coming, and I had a really bad nightmare about Luke. And I woke up in the middle of the night and I was crying. I was hurt. I was scared. I was afraid. And I tend to have dreams about him where I'm looking for him. I'm searching for him, right? Always searching for him in my dreams, because I feel like I just need that one moment to say goodbye to him. And I feel like maybe he's hurt or he's angry. You know, you go through all kinds of emotions. You just don't know. And unless you've lived through it, it's hard for people on the outside to understand this type of loss. I think all loss is difficult, but when you've been harmed like that by someone else's carelessness, it carries a whole other weight to it.
Absolutely.
It's really challenging.
For sure.
I think that's, you know, kind of it in full. It was not the outcome I'd wanted. I really wanted some kind of like hanging in the town square, you know, like some public forum, but, you know, something where I could really shout it from the rafters and just really, you know, I asked for a letter of apology, and it, you know, as lawsuits go, nobody will do that because they don't want to admit guilt. So I didn't get that, but I was told I could talk about it. I just couldn't mention the numbers. There was no sort of gag order or anything that said that I needed to kind of keep quiet about it. So that's why I jumped on the opportunity to share Luke's story now that everything was done. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alicia. You know, when you said drowning in your own air, I can relate. It's very overwhelming. Losing a companion animal by natural causes or injury is one thing. That's one level of grief. When you lose a companion animal at the hands of another needlessly due to negligence or malpractice, it really does add another entirely new level of grief, including rage, anger, betrayal, all kinds of other emotions involved. And so I think those of us that have been through it can totally relate to your story and all of the misrepresentation and the fraudulent conduct, in my opinion, that occurred. Thank you for being here and telling your story. Unfortunately, these stories just continue on, and you know, we don't know where it ends. Hopefully one day it will.
I certainly hope so.
Yeah.
People should speak. If they're afraid or they're concerned or they have questions, don't be intimidated. Just it's your decision. It's your pet.
Absolutely. Colleen, did you want to say something?
Just, yeah, that grief, it just lingers. Like when you love someone or so much, it's just, it's one that just doesn't, you can't let go of it. So I'm so sorry that I mean, your emotion and the love you had for Luke just bleeds through, every part of you. So thank you for sharing his story, and thank you for being here with us today.
Of course. Thank you so much. I really
You bet.
appreciate it. And Luke does too.
Okay.
Well, you take care. Thank you so much. And Scott, you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, we'll see you next week on the roundtable with Dr. Canizero will be our vet next week, and one of our California attorneys, Althea Kippis, who is working with me on a fantastic new program that's going to hopefully educate a lot of law school students and attorneys on how to open and manage a veterinary malpractice case so we can get more attorneys engaged and involved. And the more people, obviously, they're advocates for what we do at Joey's Legacy, the faster things will change. It'll still be a slow process, but the more support, obviously, the better. So we'll see you on the round table next Sunday night, and with our new host, Alice McKinney. And I guess that's it.
Sounds good.
Take care. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody. Bye-bye.
Night.